Joshua chapter 12. These are the kings of the land that the Israelites conquered, and of which they took possession on the other side of the Jordan, from the Arnon River up to Mount Hermon, including the entire eastern side of the Arabah, including the entire eastern side of the Arabah. There was Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon, and ruled from Aroer, which lay on the banks of the Arnon River. The middle of the river up to the Jabbok River formed the boundary with the Ammonites. This included half of Gilead. He also ruled over the eastern Arabah from the Sea of Chinnereth to the Sea of Arabah, the Salt Sea. The Salt Sea. The road to Beth Jeshimoth, and southward below the slopes of the Pisgah. There was also Og, the king of Bashan, and its territory. He was the last of the Rephaim, and he lived in Ashtaroth and Edrei, and reigned over Mount Hermon, over Salakah, and over all of Bashan, up to the boundary with the Geshurites and the Maacathites, as well as half of Gilead, up to the boundary with Sihon, the king of Heshbon. Moses, the servant of the Lord, and the Israelites conquered them. Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave them into the possession of the Reubenites, the Gadites, and one of the halves of the tribe of Manasseh. Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave them into the possession of the Reubenites, the Gadites, and one of the halves of the tribe of Manasseh. These are the kings of the land that Joshua and the Israelites conquered on this side of the Jordan. The western side, from Baal-Gad in the valley of Lebanon up to Mount Halak, and the uplands towards Seir. Joshua gave it into the possession of the tribes of Israel according to their tribal divisions. There was the hill country, the western slope, the Arabah, the mountain slopes, the desert, and the Negeb, which belonged to the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. There was one king from Jericho. There was one king from Ai, which is near Bethel. There was one king from Jerusalem. There was one king from Jericho. There was one king from Ai, which is near Bethel. There was one king from Jerusalem. There was one king from Hebron. There was one king from Jarmuth. There was one king from Lachish. There was one king from Eglon. There was one king from Gezer. There was one king from Debir. There was one king from Geder. There was one king from Geder. There was one king from Hormah. There was one king from Arad. There was one king from Libnah. There was one king from Adullam. There was one king from Makkedah. There was one king from Bethel. There was one king from Tappuah. There was one king from Hepher. There was one king from Aphek. There was one king from Lasharon. There was one king from Madon. There was one king from Hazor. There was one king from Shimron Moran. There was one king from Shimron Moram. No, forgive me. There was one king from Shimron Moran. There was one king from Akshaph. There was one king from Tanakh. There was one king from Megiddo. There was one king from Megiddo. There was one king from Kadesh. There was one king from Jokneam in Carmel. There was one king in Dor, in Naphath Dor. There was one king of the nations in Gilgal. There was one king in Tirzah. There was one king in Tirzah. There were 31 kings in all.